They weren't white. They weren't black. They weren't Native American. And yet, they'd been living in the mountains of Appalachia for centuries, before most settlers even knew the place existed. They had dark, wavy hair, gray or hazel eyes, European features, and skin tones that ranged from olive to reddish brown. They farmed the rocky ridges, kept to themselves, and, this is the kicker, nobody could agree on where in the world they actually came from. Were they the descendants of Portuguese sailors who shipwrecked on the Carolina coast? The survivors of the Lost Colony of Roanoke? Spanish conquistadors who decided gold wasn't worth dying for and ran off into the hills? Or, if you believe the wilder theories, refugees from ancient Carthage who somehow crossed an ocean centuries before Columbus? The truth is, their story is part history, part mystery, and part good old-fashioned Appalachian stubbornness. They called themselves Melungeons, and by the time outsiders discovered us, them in the late 1800s, their origins had already been hidden by hundreds of years of rumor, half-truths, and secrecy. Today we're going to dig into the real history of Appalachia's so-called lost tribe. And trust me, the rabbit hole goes deep. Hancock County, Tennessee, ain't exactly the kind of place you stumble upon by accident. Even today, there are no railroads or interstates, just a handful of winding roads clinging to the sides of mountains like they're hanging on for dear life. It's gorgeous, sure, but historically, it was the type of country you only lived in if you were stubborn enough to survive on venison, wild berries, muscle, and luck. Perched there in this rugged isolation were a people unlike any others in North America. Not quite white, not quite native, and not quite black. At least, not in the way the census liked to categorize. They had olive or reddish-brown skin, dark wavy hair, thin noses, and a distinctive bump on the back of their heads. Their eyes ranged from brown to gray. And their ancestry? Well, that's the $64,000 question, ain't it? They called themselves Melungeons. The neighbors didn't know what to make of them, so they mostly kept to themselves up on Newman's Ridge, in places with names like Snake Holler, Mulberry Gap, and Blackwater Creek. The earliest sightings. The Melungeons didn't suddenly pop into history in the 1800s. If you comb back through old accounts, there are earlier hints. French explorers in the late 1600s reported finding mountain folks in Tennessee who didn't fit the white settler or Native American mold. Fast forward to the 1780s. John Sevier, frontier hero, Revolutionary War vet, and future governor of Tennessee, mentions meeting a colony of dark-skinned people of supposed Moorish descent in East Tennessee. They claimed to be Portuguese. By 1795, the census was already counting free persons of color in the area, about 300 of them, which is impressive considering there had never been more than 50 enslaved people in that part of the mountains at the time. And then, in the late 1800s, boom, newspapers all over America discover the Melungeons, and suddenly scientists, historians, and amateur anthropologists come crawling into Hancock County to figure out who they were and where they came from. Theory number 1, the Portuguese sailors. One popular theory claims they were descendants of Portuguese sailors shipwrecked off the Carolina coast. The idea goes like this. A bunch of seafarers, possibly with Moorish ancestry, get marooned near the North-South Carolina line. The local white colonists take one look at their skin tone and say, "Nope, not living next to us." So the sailors head inland, crossing the Appalachians until they find a home in the remote valleys of Tennessee. The Melungeons themselves often leaned into this one. Claiming Portuguese ancestry was a lot safer in the racial politics of early America than admitting African heritage. Theory number 2, the Lost Colony of Roanoke. Yeah, Roanoke. You've probably heard the story. In 1585, Sir Walter Raleigh's crew sets up shop on Roanoke Island, leaves 120 settlers behind, and and promises to come back with supplies. Instead, it takes 5 years. When they finally return, the fort is abandoned, the people are gone, and the only clue is the word Croatoan carved into a tree. Some believe the colonists assimilated with the local Croatoan tribe, who already had mixed ancestry, possibly with Spanish or Portuguese roots. Generations later, their descendants might have migrated west into Appalachia, eventually becoming the Melungeons. Theory number 3, De Soto's gold-hungry army. Another theory points to Hernando de Soto. In 1540, he marches 600 soldiers deep into Tennessee chasing rumors of gold, silver, and freshwater pearls. Battles with native tribes kill half his men. De Soto dies of fever, and some survivors supposedly vanish into the mountains, marrying into local tribes. This, the theory says, could explain the Melungeons' Mediterranean looks. Theory number 4, Juan Pardo's abandoned troops. Not to be outdone, the Spaniard Juan Pardo also leads expeditions through the Carolinas and Tennessee in the 1560s, building forts along the way. When one of his forts is attacked in 1568, survivors flee into the wilderness. Could they, and their descendants, be the mysterious ridge dwellers Sevier met 200 years later? Theory number 5, Ancient Carthage. Yes, seriously. And then we have the most dramatic theory that the Melungeons are descended from refugees of ancient Carthage. The story goes that after Rome burned Carthage to the ground in 146 BC, survivors fled to Morocco, crossed into Portugal, intermarried with locals, and centuries later ended up shipwrecked on the American coast. And it's a wild tale, but people in the 19th century ate it up like cornbread and molasses. Life on Newman's Ridge. Regardless of how they got there, by 1900, there were about 700 Melungeons on Newman's Ridge. They stuck to themselves, farmed rocky hillsides, and resisted outsiders. The state classified them as free persons of color, which in practice meant fewer legal rights and a strong push to stay in isolated areas. They also avoided the conflicts that racked the region. While natives and white settlers fought over land, the Melungeons mostly stayed neutral, living in their own tight-knit communities, passing down their stories, and fiercely defending their identity. Decline and disappearance. By the 1930s, the Melungeons' numbers began shrinking. Young people started leaving the ridge, going to school, finding work in towns and cities, and marrying outside the community. By the 1960s, the distinct Mediterranean features had largely disappeared into the American melting pot. For decades afterward, the Melungeons were mostly forgotten, until the internet age. Suddenly, claiming Melungeon heritage became a badge of honor, and genealogy websites lit up with people tracing their roots back to those mysterious mountain settlements. DNA enters the picture. In the 2000s, DNA testing companies stepped in, promising to solve the mystery once and for all. The results? A mixed bag. Some Melungeons showed African ancestry, others Native American, others European. Often in the same family. The tests confirmed they were a triracial group, but didn't pinpoint a single origin story. Geneticists also pointed out that these tests have serious limitations. They rely on modern DNA samples, meaning they can't perfectly reconstruct a population that began disappearing half a century before the testing even started. Plus, DNA gets diluted over generations, so you can easily lose entire ancestors from your genetic code after 10 generations. In other words, science could tell us the Melungeons were mixed, but not exactly how, when, or where the mixing began. The name itself. The term Melungeon probably comes from the French mélange, meaning mixed. Early uses of the word weren't polite. It was a slur tossed around to mean non-white or low class. By the 19th century, the name stuck to specific Appalachian families: Collins, Gibson, Goins, Moore, and others. Some Melungeons embraced the name, others hated it. In the Jim Crow era, Being labeled a Melungeon could mean losing property rights, being reclassified as black, and facing all the discrimination that came with it. Myths and folklore. Over the years, the Melungeons attracted all sorts of folklore. They were said to have strange medical conditions, like shovel-shaped teeth, or Mediterranean fever. Some claimed that they were descended from the lost tribe of Israel, Romani wanderers, or even Turkish settlers. It's safe to say that for every documented fact about the Melungeons, there are 3 or 4 colorful but unverified stories floating around. Modern Melungeons. Today, there's no single Melungeon tribe left in the old sense. Descendants are spread across America, and many look no different than their neighbors. But the identity has been revived. Part pride, part mystery, part genealogy puzzle. The Melungeon Heritage Association holds yearly conferences, swapping stories, research, and theories. And maybe that's the real draw here. The Melungeons are a living reminder that American history isn't as simple or as clean-cut as textbooks make it seem. They're proof that long before Ellis Island, America was already a place where cultures collided, mixed, and left behind traces we're still trying to understand. So, were they shipwrecked sailors, lost colonists, Spanish deserters, refugees from an ancient war on the other side of the world? The truth is probably a little of all of it. And that, my friends, is the beauty of a good historical mystery. It keeps you digging. Because somewhere up there on Newman's Ridge, among the chestnut stumps and the quiet streams, the real story of the Melungeons is still waiting to be found.